Hey everyone, I'm Aria, and today we're going to make lava using Blender 2.9. And if you want to download this file directly, you can go to my Patreon page and sign up to become a member, where you'll be able to download this as well as a bunch of other things, including sound effects. Or if you just want to download this file, then you can go to the link in the description and download it for $1 on Gumroad. Okay, here we go. So let's open up a new scene in Blender, and we can hit A to select everything and then hit delete. Now the first thing we want to do is create a ground mesh. So if you follow the link in the description, you'll find a file that I created called Lavaland, which you can have for free to use for this project. So if you want to use this model, you can, or you can create your own. And the reason I'm giving you this is because I created this using the landscape add-on in Blender. So if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, you can just import this. Or if you'd like to create your own, just go up to Edit, Preferences, go to Add-ons, and if you search for Landscape, just make sure that this is selected and turned on. We will be using this later in the tutorial, but if you wanted to use it, I'll just hide mine here. We can hit Shift A, and if you go to Mesh, you can click Landscape, and you'll see that it makes this tiny little piece of land here. So before you click away on anything else, you can open up this little menu here, but just keep in mind that if you go to anything else after adding this, this will go away, and this is just used for a one-time setup. So if you want to get something like I was doing, you can change the size to 12, change the noise size to something like 3 or 4, and then of course you want to bring the height up a bit. You'll see that it's kind of got this flat top, and the reason is because our maximum is set lower than our height, so we just want to set this to something higher. Now you'll see that it goes all the way up in 2 points. Now what you can do is just change the seed until something that works for you. Something like this might work pretty well. Even if you find something pretty close, what you can do is just go into edit mode here and just select one of the vertices, turn on proportional editing, and then you can just hit G and Z to bring some of these pieces up and down just to get it to your liking. Okay, but I'm going to delete that one now, and I'm just going to hit this little toggle here to bring mine back. If we just look underneath, you'll see that this is basically just a plane being displaced, so we do want to make this solid because we are going to use this as an effector object for our fluid simulation. So we don't need to do anything fancy. Let's just click on our ground plane, and we can hit Tab to go into edit mode, or up on the left here you can click edit mode that way. Now if you click away, you'll see that we've got this kind of blue edge going around our mesh, and it almost looks like a double line, but it's not. So if you just hold Alt and click any one of these edges here, you'll select this entire line. Then if we just zoom out a bit, we can hold Shift Alt and just click somewhere near these other edges, just to select the entire outside. Now you can either hold Control and hit E, or you can go up here and click Edge, and then we just want to choose this option here, Clear Sharp. Now that we've got that done, we just want to extrude this downward, so let's just hit E to extrude, and then Z to lock to the Z axis. We'll just bring this down and click. Okay, so now we can hit F just to fill this bottom, and I know the topology is not great, but this won't really matter because the majority of this is going to be underground anyway. Okay, so hold Control and R just to bring up this guide here, and then we're just going to click to add in a new edge loop and just bring this up so it's pretty tight to the top. Then one more time, Control R, click, and we'll just drag this down and click. Awesome, so hit Tab to go back into object mode, or you can click up here. Okay, and then the final thing we need to do is just rotate this a bit. So let's hit R to rotate, Y to lock to the Y, and we'll just hit 5. Okay, so next we want to add our ground plane. So let's hit Shift A, Mesh, and we can click Plane. Let's hit S to scale and type in 10. Click, and then we'll just rotate this R, Y, and type in 5. So let's just bring it up a bit by hitting G, Z twice to make sure it's in local orientation. Hold Shift and we'll just bring this up just till it's covering the top of our rocks. Okay, so now we want to subdivide this, so let's hit Tab to go back into edit mode, right click and subdivide. Then depending on your computer, you can set this anywhere between say 50 and 100. Now we can hit Tab to go back into object mode. So we kind of have this harsh edge here, so what we can do is just displace our plane a little bit. Then once we add our shading, that seam should pretty much be gone. Let's head over to the right here to the modifiers tab, click here, and we're going to click displace. Don't worry about it jumping around, let's just click new, click this little icon here to go into the Textures tab, or you can just click here as well. Then we'll just change this from image to clouds. Change the size to 0.05. Now we can go back to the modifiers tab here and set the strength to 0.1. Okay, so you can see it's still looking really choppy and it's kind of large, and the reason for that is if you hit N on the keyboard, you'll see that our scale is set to 10. So first let's right click and shade smooth, Control A and click all transforms. Then you'll see that our scale goes to 1 and our bumps are looking a lot smaller. Awesome, and then we can just bring this up a little bit by hitting GZ, hold shift, and we'll just bring it up slightly and click. Okay, so now that we've got our two effector objects here, let's add our flow object next. So Shift A, Mesh, and UV Sphere. Hit GZ just to bring this up a little bit, GX to bring it back. Depending on what your setup is here, you just kind of want to get it towards the back here. We can scale it on the Z by 0.6. We can just come around to the back here, S to scale, Y to lock to the Y. Drag this out a bit. And now we just want to scale the entire thing down, so let's hit S to scale and type in 0.75. Let's just come back to the side here, rotate this a bit by hitting R and locking to the Y axis, and then just bring this down a little bit closer to our effector, just making sure that you leave a gap in between. Finally, we can add our domain, so hit Shift A and go to Mesh. We'll click Cube, G and Z to bring this up. Now we can rotate this to match our plane, so R, Y, and 5. Then we'll hit S to scale, hold Shift and hit Z twice, and then just drag this out until it's about the size of the ground plane. Let's just click the X-ray toggle here just so we can see through. Now we'll hit S, Z 2 times, and we can just scale this up and click. Okay, so we probably don't need it to be quite this wide, so let's hit S, Y, and we can just bring it in a little bit on the sides. Awesome, so now that we've got all of our geometry, we can set up our simulation. So first, let's just click on our ground plane here, head over to the physics tab on the right and click fluid. Click here and let's click effector. Since we're just using a plane, we want to make sure we add some thickness to this, so at least 0.2 should work. Next, we can click our landscape, fluid, and we can change this to effector as well. Change the surface thickness to something like 0.1. Click our sphere, fluid, and then we can add our flow. Let's make sure to change this from smoke to liquid and geometry to inflow so that we have a constant inflow of liquid. And we're going to give it some initial velocity, so let's click on the X and set this to 6. Click Z and we'll set this to 1. Finally, we can add our domain, so click on this cube, click fluid, and select domain. Click here and we'll choose liquid. Then for my resolution, I did around 200, but I know that's going to be a little high for some people. So if you've got a little slower computer, you can do something like 88. For this tutorial, I'm going to do 128. And if you've got a powerful computer, you can go all the way up to like 200. Okay, so let's click the time scale here, and we're going to set this to 0.65. But just keep in mind that my animation was about twice as long as this, so there was a lot more time for the lava to travel. So if you want a bit faster flowing lava, you can just change this to like 0.8 or something like that. And again, if you've got a slower computer, just leave this to default, but you can set this to 4 and 2. Don't go too much higher, or it'll start to change the look of the simulation a little bit too much. Scroll down, and we're going to add some diffusion here. I found for this simulation, having exact values worked best for me, so let's do 2, 1, and make sure we add a surface tension as well, so set that to 0.25. Let's turn on our mesh here, and we can just leave those as default. Then when we get to the bottom here, let's make sure that we save our project. Also, very important, just make sure that you set this to a folder that is something other than a temporary Blender folder, otherwise you'll have issues with your cache. Okay, so just choose somewhere on your hard drive to save that. Again, just making sure that our start and end frames match our animation. Go to all, save one more time, and then we can hit bake all. And this should only take around 5 to 10 minutes. Awesome, so now that that's done, let's just click our X-ray toggle. Make sure we select our domain and right click and shade smooth. Also, since we're done simulating, what we can do is just go up here, add a couple of restriction toggles, and we can just turn the sphere completely off. then we'll just name this domain. Okay, so now we can hit play to check out our simulation. And things are looking great. So hopefully yours is looking good as well, and now we can move on to finishing our scene. Okay, so just before we move on to shading, we just want to add some more ground here. So let's go back to frame 1. You could just scale this up and reset the transforms, but I'm just going to show you a different method. But before we do that, we just want to make sure that because we're done simulating, we get rid of our fluid effector. We can also click here and get rid of it as well if you want, which will just help speed up your viewport just a little bit more. Click the ground plane and we can go over to the modifiers tab here. Let's click and we're going to select array, but you'll see right away that this is not really doing what it should be doing. And the reason why is because when we reset our transforms, you'll see that all of our rotation values went to 0. So instead of calculating a 5-degree angle, it's just basically copying this straight across. So if we just select our Y rotation value, we can type in -5. And now if we click here and hold Control and hit A, select all transforms, you'll see that this pops into place. Now when we click Y and rotate it back 5 degrees, you'll see that it sticks to it properly. Okay, but you can see that there's a little seam here, so the quickest way to get rid of that is we'll just type in 0.9, but we don't really want it going down this way, we want it to go up. So let's add a minus in front of that. Alright, and then just set the count to 3. Now we can close this down. Let's click here and add a second array. Set the X to 0, and we can set the Y to 0.9. Okay, and then one final time, we'll just close this down. Click here and we'll add one more array. Set the X to 0, and then this time we're going to go -0.9. Okay, so now that we've got our larger mesh, we can just click these little arrows here and apply all of the array modifiers. Now we just want to center this a bit, so let's hit G to move, then hold Shift and hit Z 2 times. So now we can just bring it along the proper plane. And since our camera is going to be near the bottom here, we'll just offset it a bit to the top. And depending on what you're trying to do, you can just scale this a little bit larger if you like. So hit S, Shift, Z, Z, and just drag the mouse slightly. Great, so now that we've got that, you'll see that I added a few more of these to the background. So since we went through that before, I'm just going to quickly show you how I did this. So Shift A, Mesh, Landscape. We've already got our settings from before, so let's just change the seed so that it's different from before. We can bring our height up slightly and our maximum as well. Next, we need to rotate this to match our ground plane, so let's hit RY and type in 5. G to move, and then Shift Z, Z, and now we can just drag this back. And then it's just a matter of scaling this up, so let's hit S and we can just scale this so that it's a lot larger. And just for this tutorial, I'm going to use the same one, so let's hit Shift D and then Shift Z, Z, and now we can just drag this over. Hit R and Z 2 times to rotate, G, Shift, Z, Z, and we can just bring this into place. Shift D, Shift Z, Z, R, Z, Z, then just keep doing this process until you've got some variations. Awesome, so that should work just fine. So the last thing we want to do is just hit Shift A, and we're going to add our background. So click cylinder, R, Y, and 5 to rotate, S to scale, Shift Z, and let's just drag this out. Let's make sure to toggle on our X-ray, and then hit S to scale, Z 2 times, and we'll just drag this up. Then finally G, X, X, and we can just bring this back. And click, perfect, so that should work just fine. Now we're finally ready to move on to shading, so let's go into our shading tab. Click our X-ray toggle and we can just zoom in until we're in front of our lava. You can see that I didn't scale this quite high enough, so let's just make sure we hit S and Z and we can make this quite large, just so that it's out of our way. So let's just zoom in again now. Next, we just need to find a good frame for shading, so let's just right click here on the center, join areas, just to get rid of that window. Then we can bring our mouse down here and make sure we've got that little plus symbol, click and drag. Click this icon and we'll set it to timeline. Now just pick a frame that you like and we can finally turn off our X-ray toggle. Okay, so since we're shading, let's just make sure that we're in our render preview. Everything is gray because we are reflecting a gray background, but we're just going to leave that and use an emission shader on our lava to light the entire scene. Okay, so you just want to click the ground plane here. We're just going to add a pretty basic texture, so we can click new. You can just go to the link in the description to get this exact texture. You just need to set up a free account for textures.com, which will give you a certain amount of free credits per day. Okay, so you want to make sure that you download at least your albedo map, which is basically the color, a normal map, and the roughness map. Once you have those, there's several ways that you can add them in, but I'm just going to drag them in just because there's only 3 maps. Let's hook the color up to the base color, roughness up to roughness, and for our normal we just need to add one more node, so Shift A and search for normal map, then color into color and normal into normal. Then I found the color was just a little bit bright, so we can hit Shift A and search for bright contrast. Click this in and then we'll just set the bright to -0.2. Okay, so let's just name this rock. Now we can click on our landscape, click here, and we can select rock. Then of course we just want to do that to our other rocks in the background, so we'll just click on each one and set it to rock. Also, if we want to be proper, we can check and make sure that our scale is right, which it isn't, so we can just hit Ctrl A and reset all of our transforms. Now you'll see if I zoom in a little bit, the ground is looking really good, but unfortunately these are looking awful. So let's just hide our background cylinder here just so we can see what we're doing. And the quickest way to deal with this that I found is if you just go over to the UV editor here. Make sure to select one of our landscapes here. We can hit tab, and then you just want to go into top orthographic. Hit U and select project from view. Then again, just make sure all of our vertices are selected, hit S, and we can just scale this up. Now if we just middle mouse and click this over here, we can go into our render preview, hit tab, and you'll see that that's looking a lot better. So we just want to do that for each one of these. So let's click, hit tab, Q, and project from view. Come over here, S, and scale. Okay, so now that that's done, let's just jump back into our shading tab here, and you can see that our rocks are looking a lot nicer. Okay, so we can turn back on our background. Click, go to materials, let's add a new material. Then we can just bring the base value down just to match our background. Awesome. Okay, so finally let's click our lava. Click new. Now we're going to do a little bit more work with this here, but it shouldn't be too difficult. So let's just bring this over. For our lava, we need to have sort of 2 separate textures. So we're going to use a mix shader. So hit Shift A. You can go to shader and click mix. Okay, Shift A again, and let's just click here and look for emission. And then this is going to be our secondary shader. Shift A and let's search for a color ramp, and then we'll just add this into the color. Click here, and we just want to add a couple variations of red, so let's just add a dark red here. And then we'll just click our other slider here, click, and we'll change this to something like orange. Perfect, and then finally we can just set our strength to around 150. Now our 2 shaders are mixing together, but what we want to do is separate them. So the way we do that is to add some type of mask into our factor, which will separate our shaders into different sections over our mesh. Okay, Shift A, and let's do another color ramp. Click, and then we'll just drag this into the factor. Let's bring our dark value up, and we'll just bring our light value down to something around there. Shift A, and let's type in noise to add a noise texture. And we'll just bring the factor and connect it to the factor of the color ramp. Now you're already starting to see that we've got something happening here, but of course we want to bring this a little further, so we can change our scale to 8, detail to 16, and we'll change our distortion as well to 0.75. Okay, we can just go back to our color ramp here, and we'll just bring this down a bit just to give our lava a little bit more of a red color. Okay, so let's move on to our pieces of hardened rock here. So we'll change our base color to something gray. Then we want to go on to creating a bump. So let's hit Shift A and we'll type in bump to select bump map. Now we can hook the normal into normal. Shift A to add a noise texture. Click, and in this case we're going to use more than one texture. So Shift A again, and we're going to use Voronoi. So type in VOR and select Voronoi. Shift A, this time we're going to use a mix RGB, not mix shader. Now we can put this into the top, and we're going to use the distance and put it into the color. Then finally we can take our color output and put it into our height. Alright, next let's set our scale to 0.5. We're going to set the detail to 6. Bring the roughness up a little bit and set the distortion to 32. And then for our Voronoi, all we need to do is set this to 250. Okay, so it's looking pretty good, but it's looking a bit stretched. So let's just make sure that we add a couple more nodes here. So if you don't have the node wrangler, let's just go up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you can type in node. Make sure this is selected. Then just select any one of these nodes here, and we're going to hold Control and hit T. Now we've got our mapping and texture coordinate nodes, and we can just select, and instead of using generated, let's use object. If you think there's too much lava, what you can do is just come up to the color ramp here and just use these sliders to add more or less rock. You'll also notice that in my animation, I actually animated this value here to make it look like it was hardening at the end of the animation. Next, connect the vector to the vector of both of these. And then the final thing we want to do, just to make it look a little bit less stretched, is if we go to our mapping node here, we can change our Y scale value to 1.5. Okay, so now you can basically use this setup here to change anything you like. You can make these islands a little bigger or smaller, whatever you want to do. Okay, so now we're at the point where you can choose which render engine you want to use. If you are using cycles, you can just swap over. We can turn off our overlays and you can already start to see our lighting. If you're finding it a little bit dark, just make sure that you click on that material and we can raise the brightness up. Alright, let's just go back to Eevee quickly here, and if you do want to use Eevee, you just have to do a couple more steps. So let's just turn our overlays back on, click on our lava, then we'll go to the materials tab and we're going to click screen space refraction. Then all we have to do is click one of the meshes containing our rock material, go to the bottom, and we're going to add screen space refractions as well. Now we can head over to the render tab, turn on ambient occlusion, click bloom, which is way too strong, so we can bring that all the way down. So we want to add screen space reflections and refractions. Just keep in mind that once you do click refractions here, you will need to add some different things like light probes. So if you do want to cheat a little bit, you can actually just turn this off and you'll actually get some decent reflections. And you'll see that if we go back to frame 1 and play our animation, we'll actually get these moving reflections, which is a bit closer to what we're looking for. So I know this method is not correct, but it is pretty effective. Okay, so since I use cycles for mine, I'm going to switch over to cycles now. Once our simulation gets a little further out, it's going to light things up quite a bit more, so just keep that in mind when you're setting your values. Okay, so go back into flat shading, hit Shift A to add a camera, set your viewport, Control Alt and 0. Now we can click on this little camera icon and make sure that we add some depth of field. Set this to something like 0.2, and to set your focus point, you just need to open up the viewport display and turn on limits. Then we can zoom out a little bit here, and then we can just bring this out until it's matching our simulation. Hit 0 on the numpad or click here to go into the camera view, and now we can go back into our rendered shading, turn off our overlays, and then I'm just going to go to the final frame. Make sure to set up my render, and because we're using Blender 2.9, we can switch this to optics to get some denoise. Turn on our motion blur. I'm just going to bring the resolution up a little bit. Render and render image. Awesome, so if you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. And if you're able to support me even further, you can jump over to my Patreon page and become a member, which again will help me keep this going long into the future. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye!